alliance between Atiku and Obi. So anyone working against one will be working against both against both candidacy. So it's interesting. Let's see how it unfolds without making too much speculation on this issue.
Indeed, it used to be a majority of Nigerians bashing Peter Obi and the obedient movement, you know, describing them as very disrespectful to opposition leaders or anybody who does not agree with their point of view. Now it is Atiku telling his supporters that, you know, you need to respect the other candidates because we need to work together in order to make sure that the APC is no longer in power from next year. I think this is really a significant move because without unity in the opposition, it's impossible to unseat the APC. In fact, the APC already has the upper hand with the incumbency factor, the president.
Defections, absolutely.
Yeah, massive defections, the president being in control of INEC, of the police, of the military, of everything. They have everything, and you know, in their plate. If President Tinubu could win an election when he was not president, you can imagine now
when he controls the state structure.
Exactly. Although some people will say there is the gut factor, there is that factor where you don't know what will happen last minute. Anything can essentially happen in politics. However, going by, you know, the several things that we already are aware of, we know about, he seems to be in a pretty solid position. So the opposition will do much more than just talk to be able to unseat President Tinubu in next year's election.
So I actually want to agree with your points that because you've said them so well, and it's just like the conversation we've been having of the days past about how we are to expect so many reshuffles, realignments, alignments, so many changes. Just a few days ago, we spoke as well about how Atiku's son, you know, had joined the APC, and we were speculating, what does this mean? What is the meaning for, you know, PDP and all of that? But at this point in time, there's no more surprises. Nothing will surprise us at this point. New things are going to keep coming up every day, and I really believe that we can expect more changes and realignments as time goes. Just yesterday, we had this conversation with the NNPP about, you know, these changes that might be faced for Kano. And so I don't think we're seeing the end of this. And especially with Atiku, I think he has a lot more up his sleeve.
All right, we'll see how that rapprochement between himself and Peter Obi, they are the biggest guns in the ADC. Absolutely. Whether they will work together or not is yet to be seen.
Time will tell.
Yes, and New Telegraph. Let's pull up New Telegraph. PDP national chairman says the party ticket is open to former President Goodluck Jonathan and other members from the South as the party zones the presidential ticket to that part of the country. Will the zoning of the PDP ticket to the South genuinely rebuild trust and electoral strength across the country, or limit the party's appeal beyond general or regional considerations?
Yeah, we've seen the PDP now trying to reinvent its wheel in its roadmap to 2027, and it seems to be put in with someone like Kabiru Turaki, who is an Institute administrator and also a former Minister of Special Duties and Intergovernmental Affairs. He has the experience to galvanize the party structure ahead of the 2027 election, and that's what we are seeing now. So now he has said that the party ticket is open, and I think that that is in line with the principle of equity and fairness in terms of internal democratic structure and zoning. So if the party's national chairman is coming from the north, it's only fair that the presidential candidate should come from the south. So we'll be having, so that means that by implication, we'll be having a south-south contest ahead of 2027 election between the PDP and the APC, regardless of what other parties are coming with. But for the leading opposition party now, I think the name of President Jonathan comes to mind because when you look at the body language and the movement and the party's disposition, they've had some meetings with him a couple of weeks before now, and I'm only worried about the legal debates ahead of it. Section 137, subsection 3, the fourth alteration, which takes effect from June 2018, states that for someone who has been sworn in to complete someone else's tenure can only be eligible for one single term. But the Bayelsa High Court said that this, in 2022, said that this ruling was before he was before he was sworn in as president. So he was, I think, after he was sworn in, rather. So it does not apply to him. That's the underlying word. But the major hurdle to this ruling is that it can be appealed. So will the PDP want to take that risk, that political risk, ahead of this all-important contest of the 2027 election? That is a question for the party to answer.
You know, Tanem Muturaki did say that the primaries will be free and
Indeed.
fair, and there will be a transparent process with a level playing field. However, we do know that party primaries are often not entirely free for all contests. What happens is that there's the behind-the-scenes negotiations and power brokering that typically shape, you know, the outcomes in favor of the candidates who is perceived or believed to have the strongest chance of winning that election. And as for zoning to the south, you know, the PDP appears to be attempting to correct that 2023 miscalculation by, you know, giving that ticket to Alhaji Atiku Abubakar. But it remains to be seen whether this is going to turn around their fortunes. Let's quickly go to Leadership newspaper. Former Nigerian oil minister Dezani appears in London court ahead of corruption trial scheduled to begin January 2026. In August 2023, she was charged by the UK government for an alleged £100,000 bribe. The UK National Crime Agency said it suspected Dezani had accepted bribes in return for awarding multi-million-pound oil and gas contracts during her time in office. She was Minister of Petroleum Resources from 2010 to 2015 during Goodluck Jonathan administration. She was the first woman to hold that position. Yolanda, what a story.
What a story indeed. Now, what I noticed out of this is that the EFCC is actually welcoming this arraignment with keen interest. So it's interesting to see that finally this is this case is being brought to book. Now, if you'll remember, the EFCC has alleged that Dezani stole $2.5 billion from Nigeria's coffers. So there's still a lot that people are waiting for to see in terms of the results of this. She faces 6 charges of accepting bribes between 2011 to 2015, and this also includes allegations of receiving at least £100,000 in cash. I am really going to be on the front burner of wanting to see how this case turns out. So much fraud there going on, and you know, it's a very unfortunate case, but let's not speculate and let's see what the courts bring.
All right. I mean, she's going to join other public officials who have been tried in the UK. We have James Obori, who was former governor of Delta State, tried in 2012, accused of stealing over $200 million. And he was convicted and he served his jail term, later returned to Nigeria. We have Deputy Senate President Ike Ekweremadu, who was jailed alongside his wife. For organ trafficking plot under modern slavery laws in the UK. Now Dezani is the first female petroleum resources minister in government, and she is facing this crime. So the first thing is to expect that the trial will be thorough and swift, because what we've seen is that they do not waste time over there to ensure that people who are responsible for crime are brought to book. The other thing is that it reinforces the role of other countries where the rule of law is upheld in holding powerful Nigerian officials to account, even when domestically we fail. Remember that under Ibrahim Magu, there was that allegations against the same Dezani, but she was never brought back to Nigeria to be tried for those allegations. So now it's happening partially in the United Kingdom. And secondly, this trial carries significant implications for Nigeria's fight against corruption, potentially undermining public confidence in the government itself, because the sense is that she should have been tried in Nigeria and not the UK, but it's what it is for now.
Yeah, but let's not also forget that there was also a partnership agreement between the Nigerian government and the US government over the asset recovery, the infamous Galactical assets. They're talking about the yacht worth about $52.88 million asset recovery
Galactica
plan.
assets.
Yeah, so many of these. So when you talk about £100,000, I think that's just a slap in the wrist.
It is, but at least she's being tried. But let's go to another story. Belgian court must trial over Patrice Lumumba killing. The court is holding a key hearing on whether to put a 93-year-old former Belgian diplomat on trial over the 1961 assassination of Congolese independence leader Patrice Lumumba, a case his family has pursued for more than 15 years in pursuit of trust and justice for what many see as a major colonial crime involving Belgian complicity in this unlawful detention and transfer before his execution. I don't know whether this is symbolic or, you know, it actually means justice for colonial era crimes.
You know, I echo your sentiments, Dr. Constance, because this diplomat is now age 93 and he's only going to trial now. What seemed to be a forgotten story with Patrice Lumumba seems to have come back to light. And we saw this as well throughout AFCON. As many people didn't understand, there was a fan in the stands who kept standing. He was dressed as Patrice Lumumba. He stood perfectly still for the entire match, for every single match. And some people didn't seem to know who he was, but he was, you know, paying tribute to the remembrance of Patrice Lumumba and the things that he has done for Africa. So to see this case being brought back, it's bittersweet, because in this case it almost seems that justice delayed really is justice denied. Patrice Lumumba died at the age of 35 and he was killed in such a gruesome way. And to see that only now this conversation is coming back again, I know that in about, is it 2022, his tooth, which was the only remaining part of his body, was returned to the DRC officials because his body was put in acid. Yeah. So I mean, it's very unfortunate, and I just hope that this case can be brought to book in a way that brings some sort of solace to the people of the Democratic Republic of Congo, as Patrice Lumumba was truly an icon, not just of the DRC but of Africa.
And you know, if this particular man is charged and tried, it will mark one of the first times a former colonial powers official faces legal scrutiny for their actions and violent suppression, intimidation, harassment, killings that happen during those times. We have cases littered across the African continent, not only Belgium. You know, often history with Europe is romanticized because the history is not taught well. Well, history is written by the conqueror.
Absolutely.
So the history that we learn in school is very romanticized, and you know, but when you look at it critically, most of those crimes are crimes against humanity that should be tried. And you know, at the end of the day, it is profound. You know, the dead cannot return, but it offers a symbolic form of accountability and a potential closure for victims. We've reported that his family have been pursuing this case for 15 years. And you mentioned his tooth, which was the only thing left that was, I think it was eventually returned.
Yes, it was returned, yes.
Returned to,
I believe in 2022 it was returned to the DRC officials.
So would this be judgment without justice? Because you're talking about who bears the punishments, who takes responsibility for the judgment pronounced now.
So someone will be tried. Well,
they're
still discussing exactly
he's
whether
the only
he will
one
be
alive.
tried.
Yes.
If he's tried, then I mean, judgment might be passed on him. And he's very old. You don't know how long he has left to live. But beyond that, the family could also, you know, pursue beyond, you know, that for maybe like monetary compensation to the country, some kind of reparations. Reparations has been a discussion over the years.
Absolutely.
People from the Caribbean are gung-ho about reparations, not Africans particularly. You know, but so the discussion continues about colonial era injustices. Let's move on to another story on the international scene. Trump threatens 200% tariff against French wine and champagne based on the French president's intention to decline joining his board of peace. This famous board of peace. Oh, my. And he called the UK out for giving up Chagos Island to Mauritius. He said it's great stupidity. While one person is speaking up, California Governor Gavin Newsom had harsh words for Trump and world leaders in Davos. He, you know, told them to man up, get a backbone and stand up for themselves. Newsom certainly wasn't mincing words, and he's saying what a lot of people hope or wish to say to Trump, but they cannot. So this is one of the biggest, if not the biggest, crisis for Europe since World War II. Can Europe really afford to take on the U.S.?
I think President Trump has really stretched his weapon of economic diplomacy to an extreme point.
Yes.
And that would only mean a heightened global tension in the international arena, targeting oil, the French economic base to put in 200% tariff on its wine and champagne and all that is really extreme, and that will further strain the relationship between Trump and its allies. But I think I love what the congressman, the Speaker of the U.S. Congress, Thomas Johnson, said. He seems to have adopted a more conciliatory tone, affirming the U.S. relationship with the European allies, especially Britain. So I think that that might be coming from an underground acceptance that Trump has really goofed in terms of its foreign policy stretch, and this is a way of an appeasement to the European allies, because I don't see U.S. standing isolated and still on top with this kind of aggressive policy that it has really adopted in the last couple of days.
On the contrary,
quickly.
on the contrary, I think U.S. would actually stand alone with the way that things are going at the moment, because Trump is actually weaponizing these tariffs, and he's throwing them about as ways to punish countries who don't go along with what he wants. And this is what we've been seeing, because everybody has been talking about how this is mainly about Greenland. And Trump has also spoken up as well, saying that at Davos, when he arrives in Switzerland, this is also going to be part of the agenda that he's going to be pushing, which is not the right forum, but he's still pushing his own agenda here. And Trump has also dismissed the value of relationships, which is quite sad to see. We know that earlier, last year, we saw a close relationship between Trump and Macron, but now he's dismissing this relationship by saying that, oh well, his term will end soon. He will soon leave office.
You don't think Trump is overestimating the U.S. capacity against the European allies?
It's hard to say. It's hard to say.
There's something that the French president said yesterday. He, addressed the press yesterday that is very poignant. He went on about Trump strong arming the rest of Europe, and he stated that the world is shifting towards a world without laws. The only law that matters is that of the strong and those with imperial ambitions and all of that. But he's not exactly correct that the world is moving towards a world without laws, because the so-called rules-based international order has long operated in ways that favor the West. And it's often to their advantage and to the disadvantage of African countries and the global South. And so what has happened is that we have international law enforced in a way that is unequal. And you have the West on top of that for decades, whether it's trade, security, finance, and even human rights norms have been shaped to protect Western interests, while poorer countries have been expected to comply without enjoying the same flexibility or protection that they enjoy. So when President Macron wants that Donald Trump is upending the rules-based order, in a sense, yes. In another sense, no. It's partly revealing, what they've enjoyed or what they are against. Because when you look at the activities of the French across French West Africa, excuse me.
Yeah, but you also need to.
Francophone Africans will not agree with Macron.
You also need to consider its stance against Venezuela now.
Right.
And when you look at it, I was surprised that
what did they say about Venezuela?
It was listed as achievements. Trump was recently listed as achievements and he mentioned Venezuela. So it means that U.S. on its own cannot really stand without its foreign policy. And its foreign policy is now looking so parasitic.
What did the Europeans say when Trump went into Venezuela?
Don't forget that this is a state that has a burden of an external debt burden of over $36 trillion.
Europe was actually very reluctant to put out any sort of statements. They were very careful. They were walking on eggshells, making sure they didn't say the wrong thing.
The bottom line is that Europe looks weak and helpless, and militarily they cannot do much without the United States of America. That's the unfortunate situation. All right, those were your headlines for today.